Welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight. I'm Judith Kober, and today we are going to Dubai, and we will talk to Ziad Masri. He is the author of the award-winning book, Reality Unveiled, and he is also the founder of the website soulhub.com. So, Ziad, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
So, Ziad, this is always my first question. How did you end up on that endeavor of yours?
How did I end up teaching this type of stuff? Yeah, that's a long story. Well, basically, the whole spiritual journey for me, I think, started very, very young. There's one memory when I was literally 7 years old. I was about to jump in the bath, and I remember sitting there and contemplating what there was before. That's how I was thinking about it in those terms back in the day, what there was before God created the universe. And I was like, there's nothing, but how could there be nothing? Nothing is something. And I just couldn't wrap my mind around that. And it was driving me crazy. And I'd keep trying to think about it. And it was just like, so from a very young age, I was interested in this kind of thing. And as I grew up, I just always felt like, well, what's the point? We're going to grow up, we're going to make money, have a family, do all those things, and I'm going to die. What's the point? There's got to be something deeper. So I always had this kind of thirst for something deeper, but at the same time, I had a lot of worldly ambition. I wanted to become a stock trader. I wanted to be one of the best traders in the world. So I had all these kind of conflicting, I guess you would say, desires. One is to find the deeper truth about life, the deeper meaning. And then the other one is to make lots of money and do all the things that, usually people want to do. So it was kind of a struggle back and forth. But eventually the longing for truth just got deeper and deeper, where it was unavoidable. And if it stayed concurrent, it was kind of a simultaneous path with my work, because I did become a stock trader, and what happened was that the stock market has a real way of showing you your deficiencies and all the darkness that hides within you. And I found out I had all this rage that I just didn't know was there. And so in my quest to become this great trader, I ended up essentially getting into deep psychology and spirituality and then of course it took on a life of its own for its own purpose, where eventually I lost interest in everything except that. And that's when I started teaching it exclusively, which wasn't too long ago. Actually, I wrote my book while I was still, in the whole business world, but now that's all I do.
Mm-hmm. But I would say making money and spirituality do not exclude each other. What would you say? I mean, we have this notion, that the rich man cannot inherit the kingdom of God, or it will be very difficult for him. Yeah. And sometimes I think that maybe that is the rich people telling the poor just to
Yeah, no, I think it's a misinterpretation of what that actually means. What it means is not, you can be a billionaire and enlightened, technically speaking. I mean, it doesn't really matter. It's the attachment to it, and it's your addictive. Do you have an addictive desire for that? Do you think that's going to fulfill you? Do you think that's your source of happiness? Or are you just following your heart, doing what's coming spontaneously, serving others, and then in the process of that making a lot of money? Sure, then there's nothing, I don't see any conflict. I think that can just happen naturally, and I know that has occurred for me. I know people that it's happened for, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But it's previously it was, why I say it was a conflicting desire is because I had this really strong urge to make money, and I thought that would fulfill me, when I was younger. And obviously that is the issue. And so people sometimes misunderstand that. Well, when you say, it's easier for I don't know the exact quote, but for
The
a poor man
camel.
to get into heaven. Exactly. And the reality is poor, meaning not poor materially, but poor in terms of not having attachment to the riches, and not having these deep desires that you think will fulfill you. So that's how I interpret that.
Mm-hmm. So you have done a lot of work regarding the law of attraction and why that usually does not work for people. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
I can elaborate a lot on that. I think there's quite a few avenues we can go down that. And actually, I think it's worthwhile exploring all of them. I think that could be our entire interview, technically speaking. So let me start with, let me start with kind of the more basic ones, and then remind me to get to the main big one that I think is virtually untaught out there. Like it's just, I've rarely ever heard it being taught out there. And I think the reason for that is because it wouldn't be a very popular message, except for true seekers. For true spiritual seekers is a very popular message, but that's not the majority yet. And so most, teachers want to obviously sell as much as they can and all that. So they're not going to go for the least popular message in terms of the masses, although that is what I'm currently teaching. So let me get into one of the first reasons I don't think law of attraction works for people is a misunderstanding of how to apply it. So when people first learn about the law of attraction, they learn about positive thinking. They usually come hand in hand, right? So you attract what you think and what you believe, and if those are positive, you attract positive things. If those are negative, you attract negative things. However, I think that again, there's a lot of misinterpretation there. So what ends up happening is that people start rejecting their negative thoughts and start wanting to not have any negative feelings, not feel them, and push them down kind of so they can stay positive, so they can attract only the positive. The problem with that is that they're focusing completely on the conscious mind. And they are not realizing that what you actually vibrate is in your subtle energy field, which is completely driven by the unconscious mind. And you can be positive all you want on the conscious level, but if what you're vibrating at on the unconscious level is there's a lot of shadow material still there that you haven't worked through, you're going to be attracting that, technically speaking. And those are your hidden beliefs. And so when you only focus on positive things and you're sitting there focusing on your desires and trying to stay super positive, there's a great side to being positive. Don't get me wrong. Having a positive attitude is extremely helpful. However, not when it comes at the expense of looking at your shadow side and looking at the darkness, right? And so the idea is you want to have a positive overall attitude, but you want to acknowledge the darkness within, let the negative thoughts come up, but witness them from a kind of a state of higher consciousness, and allow them to arise and to be transmuted by the light of your awareness. And instead of pushing them down, saying, oh, I don't want to think anything negative, when they're clearly there. So the idea is to let them come up, to be released. That's what cleans out the unconscious, purifies it, so to say, where then you can have a kind of a positive energy field truly, kind of effortlessly. And that's what will attract, kind of a better life to you overall. So I think that's the first reason why people don't really succeed, is that they're focusing on the conscious, where it's really the subconscious mind that's really driving the whole show. And you really have to look at the darkness. I mean, I think Carl Jung, the great psychologist, said it best when he said, you don't, I think he said, you don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light. You do it by making the darkness come to the light, bringing the light to the darkness. And it's the same even with the law of attraction. It's a similar thing. You have to let it come up to be healed and resolved. So that's the first thing, I think.
So in other words, it's not really necessary to re-experience all the trauma. It's enough to acknowledge it, to observe it. And because, I mean, let's face it, some people have really gone through some really, really bad things.
Sure.
And of course, they are not crazy to re-experience it. So that is not the point here.
Yeah, I don't think well, the problem with re-experiencing it, which is I think why a lot of talk therapy and psychology doesn't work as well as, people say it should work, let's say, or it takes so long, is because usually re-experiencing means you're getting into a mental narrative around it and you're really getting sucked into the mind story about it, which is not reality. Reality is a visceral sensory experience inside the body where there's stuck emotions, and you don't have to relive the experience. You just have to feel, you have to allow yourself to feel the emotions. That's difficult. I'm not saying it's not difficult, but you can do it, and it's much better to do it without the mental story that comes with it. And so since suffering is actually, most people think suffering comes from the emotions. It doesn't. Suffering comes from the story we tell ourselves about the emotions. And so if we were to be able to just feel even dark emotions, things that feel very uncomfortable without the mental story, and just witness them, they won't feel comfortable. It won't feel good, but it's bearable, and there doesn't necessarily have to be suffering. It becomes just an emotion. It doesn't become me, the self that is suffering. That's a story. So that's the key, in my opinion.
So what I'm sensing is that inner work, shadow work, and law of attraction has a lot to do with each other. Is that correct?
If you want to do it right. Yeah, I think if you want to do it right, yeah. And that's why it's not that's not one of the popular messages. Why? Because it's difficult to do shadow work. It's not easy. You have to face your demons. You have to go through discomfort. And most people want kind of that simplistic message that the movie The Secret put out, which is all you have to do is think about it, desire it, and you'll have it, which is, I think in a way is helpful at the very early stages when you think yourself as a victim. It's helpful to think I control my own reality, but at some point you got to kind of take the mature route and say, well, okay, this isn't, a wishing well. I mean, I have to actually do some inner work to really make this work. So yeah.
Another thing that you usually point out is that you get what you are, not what you want.
That's actually the second thing I was going to talk about. Yeah.
Okay,
So
go ahead.
Perfect timing. So the second mistake I think people make with the law of attraction is that they desire, which is funny enough, because we got all these books like Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich, and all these different books that talk about desire being the most important thing. The problem with that, though, is if everyone's focusing on their desire, what is a desire? I want this. All right. So if you're putting out this desire and you're desiring, what are you going to get? More want. What is want? It's a lack. You're feeling lack in the present. That's why you want something. That's what you're putting out. What are you going to attract? More lack. So the truth of actually manifesting is you attract what you are, not what you want. So when you attract what you're thinking about what you want, you're focusing on the lack, and that's what you're going to get. But if you were to be in the present moment, to embody what it would be like to be the person you want to be, or have what you want to have, or whatever it is, then you are being that, and that's what you will put out. Of course, that comes with the first thing we talked about is a shadow work, because you can try to act as if you are, let's say rich, but if you have a lot of limiting beliefs about money, and if you have all these, inner child work and all this stuff that you haven't, sorted out, that's not what your subconscious is going to be putting out. So they come hand in hand, but once you are doing your inner work, then it's about in the present embodying now what I want, and not focusing on the want. You got to focus on the completion as if you already have, and then that's what you put out as an energy field. So I think that's another key.
So let's take one example, maybe a good relationship.
Sure.
Let's say somebody has never experienced a healthy relationship. How is she going to embody that?
Yeah, well, it's about modeling. I think modeling is an incredibly great tool for anything, where everyone, fine, you don't have you've never experienced that, but you know someone who has, or at least you think they have. You have an image of what that's like. You put yourself in that image. Or let's say, you're on a spiritual awakening path, right? And you're not enlightened, you don't know what it's like, but you've seen teachers that exude this peace. So then you carry yourself around as what would it be like if I were that? How would I act? How would I talk? How would I feel? And you carry yourself as if you already are that. Now, of course, that's not easy because the external reality is not there yet. And so this is where it takes some discipline and the inner faith of the reality creation model, which is that if I am like this within, the without eventually will have to reflect that. And that's where some faith comes in, that, as within, so without. So the problem is most people start that, then like a week later or whatever, nothing has changed on the outside. And they're like, okay. And then they give up because they're always looking, check to see. Whereas you got to kind of do it for almost its own sake, as if you're just literally enjoying the process and let go of the result. And then that's how it manifests itself, because there is an enjoyment of the process. I mean, the reality is, acting as if you already are something brings those qualities to life. We are creative creatures, right? It does bring those qualities to life. If you are wondering what it's like to feel like a peaceful human being, all that, you can summon that peace because it's actually there. I mean, that is your true nature. And same with a great relationship. The feeling of connection and love is already within you. You don't have to actually get it from somewhere else. So it's actually a great a great exercise to realize that all of it is already within you.
Mm-hmm. Would it help if you're really in love with yourself? I mean, not in the egotistical way, but
Sure. Yeah, I mean, of course, I think self-acceptance and self-love is key. I think to expect a great relationship before you have a certain amount of self-acceptance and self-love is going to be difficult, because if you haven't worked on yourself, if you haven't kind of done self-forgiveness and self-compassion, things of that nature, you're going to be seeking these things outside of yourself, thinking that your partner or your future partner or whatever is going to be what fulfills you. And again, you're going back to square one. It's going to be a needy place, a place of lack, a place of attachment, and you're putting all your faith in, in them doing this for you, which is not really going to be the sustainable, positive path that you think it is. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes we might observe thoughts like, oh, it's really hard to earn money and it does not grow on trees, and whatever recordings we have going on there. Would it help, let's say we become conscious of a thought like that, would it help if we catch us in the moment, to have a laugh at it?
Yeah, I think as long as it's not a cynical laugh, if it's a lighthearted laugh, absolutely. Well, actually, I think that's the best thing you could do. In anything and this will kind of lead into the third thing I want to say, but in anything where the mind is involved, not taking it seriously is a great thing. Having a lighthearted laugh is kind of what the witness perspective does, because it's not taking things too seriously. It's not super involved or super identified. And so a lighthearted laugh that is not cynical, that's not making fun of, but just like a good-natured lighthearted laugh, keeps you in this relaxed, peaceful state. And that's actually key in terms of manifestation. It's a state of surrender where you're letting the flow take hold instead of what you think you want, which kind of, unless you have other questions, brings me to the kind of the third main thing that I wanted to
okay, go ahead.
So the least popular message of all this one, and this is okay. So basically, I actually have on Soul Hub, I have a free webinar that's dedicated completely to this subject. It's like a 2-hour webinar, so that's how in depth you can go into it. But I'll kind of sum it up here, and I'll sum it up by saying, so we're talking about the law of attraction. Clearly, you need to first have a desire that you want to have fulfilled, right? Whether it's a better relationship or a spiritual awakening or money or whatever it is, right? The issue is that there's a missing piece of this puzzle. So the typical kind of formula says, okay, you have a desire, and then and if it's a more correct formula, it'll say you focus on the desire, but you also do inner work, you also remove limiting beliefs and blocks and all these things, and then you fulfill it, right? Whereas the truth is that there's actually a missing step here, and this is what's really ever taught out there, which is, where does the desire come from to begin with? And that's
Mm-hmm.
what almost no one asks. Well, where is this desire coming from? Let's say it's for more money. Let's just use that as an example, right? Where's this desire coming from? Now we assume, well, obviously it's coming from me. I want this. But who is this I that wants this? And why does this I want this? And so if we actually are to explore this deeper, what we find is that this I that wants this is actually a fictitious entity. It's really conditioning. It's really conditioning since birth. It's society. It's our parents. It's the culture we grew up in. It's our teachers. It's genetic, evolutionary. Our lineage. All of it. This whole bundle of what I call our programming.
Mm-hmm.
So, the way I look at things is this body mind is essentially a character, let's just say, with very specific programming, like literally a software program that we have. And we're born with it, and then it's conditioned early on in the first few years of life. And it is that is actually responsible for, I would say, 99% of our desires. And it is that tells us, if I manifest that desire, I'll be happy. And yet, maybe we should take a hint that no matter how many desires we've ever manifested, where is this lasting happiness? It doesn't come. It's like you feel happy, satisfied for a little while, and then we want the next thing, and then you want the next thing. And funny enough, this is actually seen as like this good thing in our culture. Like, yeah, this person is ambitious and they're relentless and they're always trying to improve. Yeah, but then what? I mean, when does the peace come in? When does the actual fulfillment and happiness come in? Why are we praising this constant desire for more, even if it's bettering ourselves? When are we actually going to be happy? And so if we look at it, we realize, oh, wait, this is a software program literally running the show. It is a bunch of beliefs ingrained at birth, since childhood, whatever. If you believe in things from past lives, there's a million things that all karmic, bundle into it. And it's determining what you desire. But here's the thing, you have free will, and you are also not it. So I would say probably 99% of humanity at this point in time still is so identified with this programming. And the programmer is really just the voice in your head. Whenever you're thinking, whenever you're talking to yourself, that's the programmer. You think it's you. So we all think there's this whatever entity called me, sitting somewhere right here inside behind our eyes, looking out at the world and judging and analyzing and doing all this stuff. The reality is that even scientifically, they've never found what is this me. It's the brain can create a sense of self, but there's no actual self there, and there's no actual thinker there. Thoughts are just a kind of being created by the brain spontaneously due to this programming and conditioning. And so if this is the case, and that's what's producing your desires, why are we trusting this voice, since it's never actually leading us to happiness? And is there something else that has a different set of, let's call them desires, although I wouldn't really call them that, because again, desiring is already a state of lack. You're saying the now is not good enough, I want something better. But is there something else inside, or what we actually are, that would actually fulfill us? And this is the real question to ask. And so if you study mainly Eastern philosophy, the Tao or Buddhist philosophy, or the Hindu philosophy, the real depth of it, not kind of what they become religions, they become ritualistic. But if you
Mm.
look at the non-dual perspective at the core of it, you realize that they're all talking about what you actually are is not this body mind that you think you are. What you actually are is pure awareness, spirit, whatever you want to call it, that is choosing to have this human experience, and it needs this vehicle, needs this body mind to have that experience. And so what and the what you actually are can see or witness the desires of the conditioning of what's called the false self, because it's not, it's a fictitious entity, and can question that and can choose a different path. And it's only, in my opinion, when you start doing that, that the law of attraction or manifesting or whatever it is can actually lead to true fulfillment and true happiness. And since any of us, that's all we're really after to begin with, like, why do we want this or this? We all think, well, because it's going to make me happy. So if the happiness or the peace is what we want to begin with, then why not focus what will get us there directly, instead of this roundabout path of a bunch of desires that we think we want? So that's kind of the nutshell. You can ask me any questions about that to expand further.
Um, yeah, I think with material things, there is nothing noble about being really piss poor and so broke that you cannot even afford
Sure, you
food.
can't help others when you're
Yeah.
broke. Yeah.
And so, but at the same time, and I'm not saying there's inherently something wrong with it. Let's say you are going to buy these shoes that you like so much and they cost $500. Yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you have to be aware that it is tomorrow's garbage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, well, and it's also, it's not, I'm not saying don't follow desire. I'm saying question it at least, right?
Okay.
Question it. Once you question something, say, is this what I really want? Where is this coming from? Is it my true self that wants this, or is it just what I've been programmed to believe I need, right? I'm not saying that all desires are going to fall away right away, at least. You might still go and buy that thing. That's fine. But at least you've questioned it. At least you've put a hole into the illusion that it'll make me happy. And maybe you'll go buy it knowing it won't make you happy. And you'll realize, oh, sure, it didn't make me happy, but I like it. So that's fine. But then at least there isn't this attachment to it. At least there isn't this illusion that it's going to bring me this happiness that it won't actually do. Right. So again, I'm not against buying stuff. You know, I have what people consider a pretty, nice life with a bunch of stuff. But in the past, I was quite attached to that stuff. Now, that stuff doesn't mean much, but actually, I'm much happier because I can enjoy it for what it is without putting extra value on it. And if it were lost, it's not gonna, take away the peace, let's say. And that's the key, right? And again, I'm not by any means saying, oh, it's good to be poor. I mean, like, I know what financial freedom has done for me. It's allowed me, to teach this stuff. It's allowed me to travel the world. So I'm able to do a lot of things that I wouldn't have been able to without it. So there's been a huge benefit to having financial freedom. But the idea is that when I was chasing it for its own sake, I was miserable. I wasn't happy, and I was driving it further and further away. And when I started to kind of relax and follow my follow my heart and follow what I really um, felt was the right way, at least then when it came in, I could enjoy things and kind of be more relaxed. And even if I was making the same amount of money, it felt very different. You know what I mean? So I think that's the key. It's not so much the what, it's the how.
So in other words, what I have extrapolated so far is that our subconscious has a lot to do with what we attract, more to do with that than our conscious mind.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that is definitely key. And then beyond that, I think you can even explore the subconscious and realize that the subconscious is still full of a bunch of false desires that won't actually bring you happiness. So then the question becomes, well, okay, where do the true desires come from, and how do you recognize them, and how do you follow them and to have a fulfilling life? And there's actually a way. It's actually not as mysterious as one would think it would be. And the way I've found is that we've been given a natural compass, and the natural compass is the body and the state, the energetic state of the body. And so when you are following a programmed desire, or what people call an egoic desire, and it can seem noble even, it could be even the desire for enlightenment, but when you're following it from that programmed state, there's a sense of restlessness, there's a sense of unease, there's a sense of grasping, there's a sense of lack and unhappiness in the moment. And all that shows up in the body as a lack of peace, as a lack of relaxation, as a contractive type of energy. And that's how you can know you are following your programming, and it's not going to lead you to where you think it'll lead you. Whereas once you're following what I'll call the heart, which is really the spiritual heart, or the spirit, or the awareness that you are behind this character, if you're following that, first of all, it's not actually a desire, because it doesn't feel like it's missing anything. It's more a spontaneous flow that is kind of has a destiny to head in a certain direction. And if you're following that, what you'll feel in the body is peace. You'll feel contentment. You'll feel happiness. You won't feel anything is missing. It'll be more like an adventure. Like you don't have what's about to be manifested, but you're not feeling like you're missing. You more feel like there's just a pure enjoyment in the process of creating it while enjoying each step of the process. Now, it's a lot better way, or more enjoyable way to live, where what you're doing then is you're allowing your spiritual core to manifest through you, not the small self or the false self's will. So it's more like divine will acting through you. And then you are allowing that to guide you through this compass of feeling. That's why they're saying, and follow your bliss, or follow your heart. There's some wisdom to that. And you keep checking in to the body, and whenever you're off course, you're feeling stressed out or grasping. And even if you're actually going on a correct path, let's say, for your soul, the ego can jump in. The false self will jump in and try to co-opt that. So anytime, it doesn't necessarily mean you're on the wrong path. Sometimes the ego's got involved, and now it's thinking about the future, like that's what it does. And, regretting the past and all that. And you just got to get back into the now. And again, follow your heart, and do what you enjoy, and being gratitude in the moment about where you are, and life genuinely has this sort of magical aspect when you're doing that. Just synchronicities. Tom, who you interviewed before, Tom Montauk, he's an expert in synchronicities, and we've talked about a lot, him and I. And synchronicities just start, like, it's crazy. I mean, the things I've experienced in my life in terms of synchronicities, it's like a movie. It's shocking sometimes how things line up. And when I'm trying to figure things out in my mind, that's when I usually go astray. And when I kind of let go and kind of go into the heart, and thoughts can come in, but they're inspired thoughts. They don't feel like me trying to figure stuff out. It just feels like I'm letting go, and the inspired idea comes in. I follow that, or a thought, or just this little hunch to read this book, or talk to this person, or whatever. And then through a bunch of subsequent synchronicities, something gets created that's I would have never been able to do. It's kind of how it happened when I wrote my book. At first it was going to be a blog post, and then through this person and that person saying, hey, you should do that way, and I'm following my heart and doing it, and just kind of wanted to be of service, ends up becoming a bestseller, getting translated into multiple languages, winning awards. And there was zero desire for that. It was just like, oh, I want to help people. That's it. And following my heart to do that. And that's what happened through all these synchronicities. And so that's what tends to happen when you follow the heart. And what happens with it is much higher odds of actually being fulfilled when you're manifesting these things. This is the whole point to begin with.
Mm. So, in other words, we are manifesting all the time, whether we do it consciously or
Oh yeah.
unconsciously.
Oh, for sure.
And that also works on a collective level, I would say, yeah?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think everything that is on the personal level can be extrapolated up to the collective. Let's take, for example, a little off topic right now, but it's coronavirus, right?
I was going to ask that.
Oh,
How
you are?
did we manifest that?
Yeah. Well, I think so here's how I'm looking at this whole situation. I think it's a collective dark night of the soul, and I'm not saying it's over. I think it's probably going to get seemingly worse, not necessarily with the virus itself, but with other things coming to light and all that, before it gets better. But it's overall, I think it's a very needed process for the planet, and I think it parallels what happens actually in a personal spiritual awakening. So you hear a lot about spiritual awakening being this beautiful thing, and there's definitely a lot of beauty to it, but in reality, it's one of the most difficult things that you can ever experience, and that's because a true spiritual awakening brings up all this hidden darkness to the surface, right? And that's why they call it the dark night of the soul and things like that. And it's kind of the only way out is through. You gotta go through the seemingly hellish things to get to the other side. And it's like the whole hero's journey and all that all of our myths are based on. But that's what happens in a personal spiritual awakening. It can feel very tough, but there's also very beautiful moments. And of course, the end result is, something beyond imagination of how, the peace or the beauty or the love that's on the other side. Well, on a collective level, it's the same thing. We've been in a lot of darkness on this planet, a lot of hidden darkness, a lot of shadow stuff happening that the vast majority are not aware of. And it needs to come to the surface. It needs to come to the light of awareness. There cannot be a great shift of awakening into a new age and all this stuff without the darkness being seen. And so this has to happen. Now, the coronavirus is something that's very interesting. For the first time globally, we are being made to face our fears, uncertainties, doubts in a very conscious way that we can't hide from anymore, especially since everyone's locked up at home and they have nowhere to go and nowhere to hide. So, it can be looked at. It's kind of like you're removing people's escapes. So we have all these escapes. I mean, life, as I see it, is just a bunch of escapes from facing ourselves. We have the movies, we have the gym, we have like food, a million restaurants, nightclubs, a million different things just to get away from being still and facing discomfort within. And now people are having to do that much more, and only good can come out of that ultimately for the collective. And I think it's also causing a lot of kind of rethinking of priorities and am I really happy with my way of life and all these types of the materialism and all this stuff is kind of being called into question. I think what's going to happen a little down the line is a lot more kind of the true secrets of what's been happening as the earth as being a slave system of the global elite, and a lot of the dark stuff is going to rise to the surface, and people are going to have to deal with that. And so that's what I think is happening. I think this coronavirus is the first major visible trigger. And I actually wrote about this in my book about the Great Shift. And I wrote the book a little over 3 years ago, and I talked about the Great Shift probably in the near future happening. And I think this is part of the first major visible sign. I think it's been happening for a while, but this is the first major visible sign that I think can lead to a grand mass awakening. But it's going to be a rough ride on the way there, as it always is.
Yeah. But I have, as of now, let's put it that way, as of now, I do not have the impression it will yank everybody into a shift of consciousness.
No, and it doesn't need to. So when I talk about a spiritual awakening, a global one, I'm definitely not talking about 7.7 billion people awakening. I mean, I'm talking about, I'm talking about 7.7 billion people awakening. I mean, I'm talking about 7.7 billion people awakening. I mean, I'm talking about 7.7 billion people awakening. I mean, I'm talking about 7.7 billion people awakening. I mean, I'm talking about 7.7 billion people awakening. I mean, I'm talking about 7.7 billion people awakening. I mean, I'm talking about 7.7 billion people awakening. I mean, I'm talking about 7.7 billion people awakening. I mean, I'm talking about 7.7 billion people awakening. I mean, I'm talking about 7.7 billion people awakening. I mean, I'm talking about 7.7 billion people awakening. I mean, I'm talking about 7.7 billion people awakening. I mean, I'm talking about 7.7 billion people awakening. I mean, I'm talking about 7.7 billion people awakening. I mean, I'm talking about 7.7 billion people awakening. I mean, I'm talking about 7.7 billion people awakening. I mean, I'm talking about 7.7 billion people awakening. enough people, much more than before.
Mm-hmm.
So here's my view. My view is a few 100,000 truly awakened beings can shift the entire planet. And the reason
Mm-hmm.
for that is because um, the the power of high consciousness, or a high level of consciousness, is so much stronger than the negative power of lower consciousness. And so you can have literally a few 100,000 people with their positive energy being able to shift the entire planet, even if 7 billion people were relatively low conscious or negative. That's how it happens, because negative energy by definition is based on separation. It's not integrative, right? Whereas positive energy integrates and it becomes exponential, and it helps itself grow. That's the very nature of it. So I don't think we need hundreds of millions of people, or even tens of millions, to really awaken. I think it's a relative minority, but still much more than we have currently, that can cause this great shift to occur. And then it becomes like a cascading effect. And this has been studied in science, where you see, like, it's called the 100th monkey effect, where if enough, of a certain species get to a certain whatever evolutionary leap, then all of a sudden, boom, the rest, it starts occurring, and the rest almost effortlessly. Well, whoever's at this point trying to awaken conscious is kind of doing the hard work for everyone else, kind of a service. So that's how I view it.
Do you think there will be collapse of supply chains, financial collapses, and things of that nature along the line?
I think it's possible. I can't predict. I genuinely don't know. I think the global elite are trying to pull that off, are trying to crash the economy purposefully and do a lot of stuff. I don't know if they'll be successful. I hope not. If I had to guess, I don't think they will be, not to the definitely the level that they want to be. I think there could be natural disasters as the earth cleanses itself in its energy field. There could be complete economic collapse. It could happen. I genuinely don't know. And so I'm, like anyone else, I have this mind that tries to project the future, but I try to keep it in the present, to realize that anything I think is actually bullshit, like, to be real, like, because I don't know. So it's BS. And if we believe our thoughts, we're just fooling ourselves. I mean, it's just all opinions. So if you just, I think that if you want to call anything wisdom, I think wisdom is realizing you don't actually know anything from a mental perspective. It's all concepts. It's all projections. I think the only thing you can know is something that can't be put into words, and that's the awareness on the heart level that you are. And that's not concerned about what the hell is going to happen in the future. It's concerned about being in now and realizing that if you're in now and if you are present here, that's the eye of the storm, and you can be peaceful regardless of what happens. And not only peaceful, but funny enough, the right, or let's say not right, the more efficient path, the smoothest one, the easiest one, will open up before you if you're making decisions from here, from being in the now, than from here and wondering what's going on in the future. And I think we all struggle with that. I have all these thoughts. I've just kind of been learning more and more and more as time passes to not really give them much credence. I mean, I'll have conversations with people, but I'll try to remind myself after every single one, that was just BS, whatever you just said. So.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. Let's say I know it's in the cards, but as of now, I'm fine. I'm sitting here. I have a roof over my head. I'm not starving, so I'm not going to freak out.
Yeah, and I think if you stay in that energy field, if you stay in that state of consciousness, what you are, your higher self, will guide you to not be starving, and not much more than if you following the voice in your head and the mind, and because it's based on fear. And so whenever we follow any advice, internal, external, that's fear-based, which all mental advice is ultimately, if you track it back, then there's always negative consequences you don't foresee. Because what you're really doing is you're saying, I, as this small self, know what's in my best interest and the best interest of others, even though I have such a limited view, such a tiny limited view of the whole complex thing, that there's so much everything's so interrelated, so much that there's no way you can know. Whereas if you go into the heart and you're kind of allowing the divine will to work through you, then it knows, and you don't have to know mentally, but it knows far more than you could ever know, and things take care of themselves much better than you ever could. So it's kind of coming to a place of humility that I really don't know what's in my own best interest or what's in the best interest of others from a mental perspective, but something within me, the true I, does know. And so let me trust that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also think that if you allow that process to happen, even if all these situations come to pass, that you might experience a totally different outcome than other people that, let's say, they have stored food for 6 years and have prepped up to a year. But deep down, they are convinced this is the end.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I don't think there's anything wrong, let's say, with being prepared physically. Yeah. So, because, we are divine, but we're also human. So, for instance, have food supplies and have all that, but you don't need to live your life based on fear. That's just natural precaution. That's just a wise thing to do. But, overdoing it and being afraid and letting the mainstream media's narrative become your focus and paying attention to that, wondering what's going to happen, and that just gets you sucked into this whole negative state of being. Whereas if you focus within, do meditative practice, watch very little news, pay very little attention to the numbers they're throwing or all the things they're talking about, I think you're much better off.
Yeah. Another thing where, with all these concepts, we can go overboard. Yeah. And I would like to have your take on that.
Sure.
Another biggie is don't judge. And yes, I get it. Yet, sometimes I find people in living situations where I think you need to do a judgment call. I will never say it unless somebody asks me what I really think. So let's say they are in an abusive household. Emotional, physical abuse doesn't matter. In that situation, if you are sitting on your fluffy cloud 9, don't judge. He has a very, very hard childhood. No, sorry.
Yeah, so I think what it comes down to, so here's the thing. I think people sometimes kind of confuse the concepts of judgment and discernment. So there's a very big difference, right? It's always good to practice discernment. So there's no reason why anyone should stay in an abusive relationship, if they can, obviously, if they have that awareness. But so that's where discernment comes in. Is this for my highest good? Is this for the highest good of the other person? And you can remove yourself out of the situation. Judgment, I see as a different way, as if, some people are sitting there judging that person for staying there, as if they know what it's like to be them. And really the judgment is saying, I'm superior than you. That's all a judgment really is. Because you think the underlying cause is always to increase your sense of self at the expense of the other, which is just the false self, the ego increasing its self-worth by feeling better than others. And that's the essence of separation mentality versus unity. So I think you can have discernment. You can even give helpful advice if it's asked for. And that's not necessarily called judgment. It could be an observation of facts. You could give the advice without attachment to the other person taking it. You could not see yourself as better than the other person because your situation is better. All right. So that's kind of how I differentiate between judgment and discernment.
Okay. So to sum it up, consciousness is the cause, you say, and the outside is the effect.
Yeah. I think that's a very, very good way to sum it up. I think everything testifies to the opposite. we think the outside is the effect, and that's why it's always been called an illusion in all the great texts. And it's a very powerful illusion because it fools us. Obviously, we think that, if I am, let's say, in a situation that sucks, for lack of a better word. I'm unhappy. So obviously the situation is causing my unhappiness. But the reality is, there's a reason why you're in the situation. Um, and so you could have a lot to learn from that situation. You could have just attracted it because of negative beliefs that are unexplored or whatever. And you can always choose to change it, or you can choose, if you can't change the outside, sometimes you can't. Let's say you're falsely in prison, sometimes you just can't. But it's been known that there have been people in prison that are more peaceful than anyone outside of prison. So you always have control about how you react, and that's kind of the key. It's, I am in control of how I perceive any situation, and it's the perception of the situation that causes the suffering or not. It's not actually the situation itself. Even when there's actual pain, so even physical pain, if you are able to be with it in the moment without a story of, oh my God, this is going to last forever. Oh, I can't bear this. All those mental stories, that's what creates much of the suffering. Even physical pain, if you're able to be with it in the now, it's actually much more bearable with a lot less suffering than you'd otherwise think. And that's kind of the most extreme thing, is physical pain, because it's kind of like, well, that's real right now. But everything else is just mind-based. It's just, it doesn't have a reality. It's all imagination projecting a future that doesn't exist. And that's where the vast majority of suffering comes from. And so, yeah, I do think consciousness is the cause, and that's always within us. I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying that I do it perfectly, but we just keep learning to do it better and better and better.
So that is the real reason why people say, change yourself, change the world.
Yeah, I think that's a very true, wise thing. I think a lot of people are sitting there wanting the world to change and fighting against it to change and complaining and blaming this or that. But I mean, in the end, you can be helping a million times more by just finding peace within yourself. Your energy field alone, even if you actually never did a single physical act, would be helping far more than you could ever imagine. But then usually you're also inspired to act in ways that have huge effects too. So it comes hand in hand usually.
And I think our own history is a witness to that as well, because all the revolutions always backfired.
Yeah. I mean, even if they seem to have succeeded, there's always some negative consequences created out of it, because negative energy cannot, by definition, it literally cannot create just a positive outcome and that's it. There's always two sides of the coin. And so negative energy is going to have some negative effect. You can seemingly solve this problem, it will create another problem in its place. And that's the problem with fighting against it, the fight against cancer, the fight against poverty, the fight against environmental destruction. It's all a fight. It's all based on negative contractive energy. Whereas you can have way more positive effect if you were to come from a place of love and and a place of service, and solutions that you could never think of can occur, and these solutions will not have a negative consequence because there isn't that fighting negative energy. And again, this does not mean be passive. That's the one mistake people, when I say this, people think, oh, does that mean I just sit there and accept it? No, it's not what it means. It means accept the now, because that can't change. It's now. It is what it is. And from that place of clarity, accepting things as they are, then positive action can come, but it comes spontaneously from the flow of life, from what I call the divine, instead of from this little sense of self that we have that thinks it knows best and how to solve problems, which it really doesn't, not in our lives and not globally.
Yeah. And I think balance is a good advice as well.
Yeah, of course. I think balance is, well, ultimately that perspective that I talk about, the awareness that is beyond is a state of balance. That's what that is. That's not, going oh my God, extremely positive and like, oh, I only think because I only think positively means you're completely disregarding the negative, right? And you're
Yeah.
not looking at the darkness. And it's not the other side. It's actually a balance. It's this nexus point that integrates both polarities
Mm.
without being attached to one or the other. And that's actually the key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that will also prevent you from, let's say, you have the tendency to be of, and I find it good to be of service and helping
Mhm.
others, but there
Of
might
course.
come a
Yeah.
point where you
Yeah.
know that you're surrounded by energy
Yeah.
vampires.
Yeah, people who
They,
use you and take advantage of you.
mm,
But that's again, that comes with discernment, right? That comes
mm,
with understanding, um, you know, that balance point that you talk about, and that being of service to others is not being a doormat. It's not completely sacrificing yourself. That's not what it means. So that's why, say don't go so far into the light and
mm,
fight the darkness, whether globally or personally, not realizing that there is this greater perspective that holds both in their proper place, and balances both and integrates both, and realizes that ultimately all is one, and these dark forces that everyone is judging ultimately are you. All the greatest grand scale, and so is everything within you. So it's kind of just the same thing.
yeah. I had a lot of fun, Ziad. Thank
Good,
you
me
so
too.
much for coming.
Thank you for the great interview. I think
And,
it flowed pretty naturally.
and I hope you come back one day. All the best
Yeah,
for your work and
thank you very much.
stay strong in Dubai.
Yeah, yeah, you
So,
too.
yeah, thank you. So, guys, that was it. Night Flight for today with the wonderful Ziad Masri. We see
Thank
you
you very
all
much.
next time. Stay safe and sound. Until next time, bye bye.